When 10-year-old Michael Jackson walked into the gymnasium at Gary Elementary School on that crisp November morning in 1968, his sequined jacket hidden beneath his regular school sweater, no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. For months, Michael had endured the relentless torment of Tommy Rodriguez, the school's most notorious bully, who seemed to take special pleasure in humiliating the quiet kid who moved weird and thought he was special. But today was different. Today, Michael Jackson was done being a victim, and what he was about to do in front of 400 students, teachers, and parents would become the stuff of legend. A performance so stunning, so impossible for a 10-year-old, that it would silence his tormentor forever and prove that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is showing the world exactly who you really are. This is the untold story of how one extraordinary performance transformed a shy, bullied child into a confident performer, and how Michael Jackson learned that his greatest weakness, being different, was actually his most devastating strength. The bullying had started in September, the first week of fourth grade. Tommy Rodriguez was 12 years old, held back twice, and used his size and age advantage to terrorize anyone he perceived as weak or different. Michael Jackson, small for his age, soft-spoken, and carrying himself with an unusual grace that Tommy couldn't understand, became his primary target almost immediately. "Hey, dancer boy," Tommy would sneer as Michael walked down the hallway, his friends laughing on cue. "Why do you walk so weird? You think you're in some kind of show?" Michael would try to ignore him, but Tommy always found new ways to escalate. He'd knock books out of Michael's hands, trip him on the playground, and worst of all, mock the way Michael moved when he thought no one was watching. The cruelty wasn't just physical, it was designed to make Michael feel ashamed of who he was. Tommy would wait until the hallways were crowded to maximize humiliation. "Look at this freak," he would announce loudly. "He thinks he's some kind of star, walking around like he's dancing all the time." Then Tommy would do exaggerated, clumsy imitations of Michael's natural grace while his friends erupted in laughter. Michael had grown up in a household where music and performance were as natural as breathing. The Jackson 5 was already performing at local clubs and talent shows around Gary, building a reputation that would soon catch the attention of Motown Records. At home, Michael was confident, electric, the undisputed star of his family's musical act. But at school, surrounded by kids who didn't understand his world, he felt like he had to hide who he really was. "Just ignore him, baby," Katherine Jackson would tell her son when he came home with stories of Tommy's latest harassment. "Some people pick on others because they're hurting inside. Don't let him make you feel bad about being special." But ignoring Tommy wasn't working. If anything, Michael's refusal to fight back seemed to encourage the older boy to push harder, to find new ways to humiliate him in front of their classmates. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in November. Michael had been practicing a new routine the night before with his brothers, working on moves that would later become his signature style. He was still humming the melody as he walked into school, his body unconsciously moving to the rhythm in his head. Tommy spotted him immediately. "Look at this freak," Tommy announced loudly, gathering a crowd of students around them. "He's doing his stupid dancing again. What's wrong with you, Jackson? You think you're some kind of star?" Tommy began mocking Michael's movements, doing exaggerated, clumsy imitations that had the other kids laughing nervously. Michael felt his face burning with humiliation. "I'm not doing anything," he said quietly, trying to walk away. But Tommy grabbed his arm. "Oh, yes, you are. You're always doing your little dance moves, acting like you're better than everyone else. Well, you're not special. You're just weird." "Let go of me," Michael said, his voice stronger now. Something in his tone made Tommy pause, but only for a moment. "Or what? What are you going to do, dance at me?" Tommy shoved Michael backward, sending him stumbling into a group of lockers. The hallway erupted in gasps and nervous laughter. Michael straightened himself up, brushing off his clothes with a dignity that was remarkable for a 10-year-old. He looked Tommy directly in the eyes for the first time in months. "You want to see me dance?" Michael said, his voice calm, but carrying an edge that made several kids step closer to hear. "Then you'll get your chance." That afternoon, Mrs. Patterson announced that the annual school talent show sign-ups were open. "We'll be holding the show next Friday in the gymnasium," she explained to Michael's class. "Any student who wants to perform should put their name on the sheet outside the principal's office. Michael's hand shot up immediately. Mrs. Patterson, I'd like to sign up, he said, his voice clear and confident in a way that surprised even himself. Around the classroom, his classmates exchanged glances. Tommy Rodriguez, who had been transferred to Michael's class as a disciplinary measure, let out a mocking laugh. This should be good, Tommy whispered loudly enough for half the class to hear. Can't wait to see you make a fool of yourself in front of the whole school, Jackson. But Michael didn't respond. He was already thinking about what he was going to perform, already planning how he was going to show everyone, especially Tommy Rodriguez, who he really was. That evening, Michael sat down with his family to plan his performance. I want to do something special, he told his brothers, something that will show them what I can really do. Jermaine, Tito, Jackie, and Marlon understood immediately. This wasn't just about a school talent show. This was about their little brother standing up for himself in the only way he knew how, through his art. We'll help you put together something incredible, Jermaine promised, but it has to be all you up there. This is your moment. They spent the next week crafting a routine that showcased everything Michael could do. His smooth moves, his emotional expression, his ability to command a stage and make every person in the audience believe in the story he was telling through dance. The night before the talent show, Michael could barely sleep. He kept thinking about Tommy, about all the times he'd been made to feel small and different and wrong. But now, lying in his bed, Michael felt something new. Not fear, but anticipation. He was ready to show his school exactly what different could look like. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, but inside Gary Elementary's gymnasium, the energy was electric. Students, teachers, and parents filled the bleachers, chattering excitedly about the upcoming performances. Backstage, in the small area behind the gymnasium stage, Michael sat quietly while other performers practiced their acts around him. Mrs. Patterson found him there 20 minutes before the show started. Michael, are you ready? You look a little nervous. Michael looked up at his teacher, and she was surprised by the calm confidence she saw in his eyes. I'm not nervous, Mrs. Patterson. I'm excited. The show began with the usual array of elementary school talent. A girl playing piano, a group of boys singing off-key, a magic act that went slightly wrong. The audience was polite, supportive in the way that school communities are, but nothing had really captured their attention yet. Then Mrs. Patterson stepped to the microphone. Our next performer is Michael Jackson from Mrs. Anderson's fourth grade class. Michael will be performing a dance routine to I Want You Back. There were a few scattered claps from the audience, mostly from parents being polite. Tommy Rodriguez, sitting in the third row with his friends, leaned back with a smirk already spreading across his face. The gymnasium lights dimmed and a single spotlight illuminated the center of the stage. Michael walked out, and even before the music started, something had changed. Gone was the quiet, shy kid who tried to make himself invisible in the hallways. In his place stood a young performer who moved with purpose and confidence, wearing a sequined silver jacket that caught the light and transformed him into something almost otherworldly. The opening beats of I Want You Back filled the gymnasium, and Michael began to move. What happened next would be talked about at Gary Elementary for years to come. This wasn't just a 10-year-old doing some dance steps. This was a professional-level performance that seemed impossible coming from someone so young. Michael's feet moved in patterns that appeared to defy physics, gliding, sliding, creating rhythms that perfectly complemented the music. His spins were controlled and smooth, his jumps perfectly timed. But more than the technical skill, it was the way he commanded the stage, the way he made every person in that gymnasium believe that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The audience went from polite attention to stunned silence to erupting in amazement. Kids who had never paid attention to Michael before were on their feet, mouths open in disbelief. Teachers exchanged glances that said, "Did you know he could do this?" Parents reached for each other's arms, whispering, "Is that really a 10-year-old?" But it was Tommy Rodriguez's reaction that would become legendary among the students who witnessed it. The boy who had spent months mocking Michael's weird movements sat frozen in his seat, his smirk completely gone, replaced by an expression that could only be described as shock mixed with something approaching awe. As Michael continued his performance, something remarkable began to happen in the audience that went beyond simple entertainment. The initial gasps of surprise gave way to a deeper recognition that they were witnessing not just talent, but transformation. In the front rows, younger students sat with their mouths agape, some of them unconsciously moving in their seats as they tried to mirror Michael's movements. Behind them, the fourth and fifth graders, Michael's peers who had watched him endure months of harassment, began to understand that the quiet boy they thought they knew had been hiding something extraordinary all along. Mrs. Anderson, Michael's homeroom teacher, felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she watched her student command the stage with a confidence she'd never seen from him in the classroom. She thought about all the times she'd worried about Michael's withdrawn behavior, the way he seemed to shrink into himself whenever Tommy Rodriguez was around. Now she was seeing the real Michael Jackson, the one who had been there all along beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The transformation wasn't just in Michael's movements. It was in the very atmosphere of the gymnasium. What had started as a typical school talent show, filled with polite applause and gentle encouragement, had become something electric. Parents who had been chatting quietly with their neighbors fell silent, their attention completely captured by the small figure on stage, who moved with the grace of someone far beyond his years. In the middle section of the bleachers, Katherine Jackson sat with tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from a profound mixture of pride and relief. She had watched her youngest son struggle for months, coming home from school with stories of humiliation and cruelty that broke her heart. She had seen his confidence slowly erode under Tommy's relentless harassment, watched him begin to doubt the very gift that made him special. Now seeing him reclaim his power through the beauty of his art, she knew that this moment would change everything for Michael. The technical aspects of Michael's performance were becoming more impressive with each passing second. His footwork displayed a precision that would have been remarkable in a trained adult dancer, but coming from a 10-year-old boy, it seemed almost supernatural. He executed complex combinations of steps that required not just natural ability, but countless hours of practice and dedication. The way he isolated different parts of his body while maintaining perfect rhythm showed a level of body control that professional choreographers would envy. But perhaps the most stunning aspect of Michael's performance was his emotional expression. He wasn't just executing dance moves. He was telling a story through movement, conveying feelings and experiences that resonated with every person in the audience. His face showed joy, determination, and a kind of freedom that was beautiful to witness. He had found his voice, and it spoke through every gesture, every step, every perfectly timed movement. Tommy Rodriguez, still frozen in his third-row seat, was experiencing something he had never felt before, genuine remorse mixed with grudging respect. As he watched Michael glide across the stage with impossible smoothness, Tommy began to understand the magnitude of his mistake. He had been tormenting not just any quiet kid, but someone with extraordinary gifts. The weird movements he had mocked so cruelly were actually the early signs of genuine artistry. The grace he had ridiculed was the natural expression of someone born to perform. For the first time in his 12 years of life, Tommy Rodriguez was seeing what real strength looked like. It wasn't about using size and age to intimidate smaller kids. It wasn't about making others feel bad to make yourself feel better. Real strength was what Michael was displaying on that stage. The courage to be yourself, to share your gifts with the world even when people tried to tear you down for being different. The other students who had laughed at Tommy's cruel imitations began to feel their own sense of shame as they realized they had been part of something ugly. They had allowed fear of becoming targets themselves to make them complicit in the systematic humiliation of someone who was actually remarkable. Now, watching Michael's triumphant performance, they understood that they had been wrong, not just about Michael, but about what deserved respect and admiration. As Michael prepared for his final sequence of moves, the gymnasium had reached a level of anticipation that was almost palpable. Even the youngest children in the audience seemed to sense that they were witnessing something historic, something they would remember and talk about for years to come. The very air seemed to vibrate with energy as 400 people held their collective breath, waiting to see how this extraordinary performance would conclude. Michael hit move after move with precision that seemed impossible for his age. He moonwalked before anyone had ever heard the term, his feet sliding backward while his body moved forward. He spun in a way that made the sequins on his jacket catch the light like a disco ball, sending sparkles of light dancing around the gymnasium walls. For his finale, Michael performed a series of moves that would later become his signature. The anti-gravity lean, the toe stand, the spin that ended in a perfect freeze. When the music stopped, the gymnasium exploded in the loudest applause in the school's history. 400 people on their feet, cheering, screaming, demanding an encore. Michael stood in the spotlight, breathing hard but smiling with a confidence that transformed his entire presence. He wasn't the quiet, bullied kid anymore. He was a star, and everyone in that room knew it. He took his bow and walked off stage, but the applause continued for a full 2 minutes after he disappeared. In the aftermath of the performance, everything changed. Kids who had ignored Michael before crowded around him, asking questions, wanting to know where he learned to dance like that, if he would teach them some moves. Teachers who had seen him as just another quiet student suddenly understood that they had been witnessing the development of something extraordinary. But the most important change was in Tommy Rodriguez. The boy who had tormented Michael for months approached him after the show, his usual group of followers notably absent. "Jackson," Tommy said quietly, his voice lacking any of its usual mocking tone. That was incredible. I didn't know you could do that." Michael looked at his former tormentor with a calmness that surprised them both. "There's a lot you don't know about me," he said simply. "Maybe next time you should find out who someone really is before you decide to pick on them." Tommy nodded, looking genuinely ashamed for the first time in months. "I'm sorry," he said, and Michael could tell he meant it. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything." From that day forward, Tommy never bothered Michael again. In fact, he became one of the students who would defend Michael if anyone else tried to give him trouble. Mrs. Patterson pulled Michael aside before he left school that day. "Michael, that was the most remarkable thing I've ever seen at a school talent show. Where did you learn to perform like that?" Michael smiled, the confidence from his performance still radiating from him. "My family, we perform together. We're pretty good." "Pretty good?" Mrs. Patterson laughed. "Michael, you're going to be famous someday. Mark my words." It was a prediction that would prove more accurate than she could have imagined. That night, the Jackson family celebrated Michael's triumph. Joe Jackson, never one to show emotion easily, put his hand on his youngest son's shoulder. "You showed them what discipline and talent can do," he said with rare pride in his voice. But it was Catherine who understood what the performance had really meant for her son. "How do you feel, baby?" she asked when they were alone. "Different," Michael said, and she could see it was true. "Like I don't have to hide who I am anymore. Like being different isn't something to be ashamed of." Catherine smiled, knowing that her son had learned one of life's most important lessons, that what makes you different is often what makes you special. The story of Michael's legendary performance spread throughout Gary within days. Other schools heard about the 10-year-old who had silenced his bullies with a dance routine that seemed impossible for someone his age. Local talent show organizers began calling the Jackson House, wanting to book Michael for their events. Years later, when Michael Jackson had become the king of pop, he would sometimes tell interviewers about the day he learned to stand up for himself. "There was this kid at school who made my life pretty miserable," he would say, "but there was a talent show, and I decided to show him and everyone else who I really was. That performance taught me that the things people make fun of you for might actually be your greatest strengths." The lesson stayed with Michael throughout his career. Whenever he faced criticism for being different, for moving to his own rhythm, for refusing to fit into other people's expectations, he would remember that gymnasium in Gary, Indiana, where a 10-year-old boy had silenced 400 people with nothing but his talent and his courage to be himself. Tommy Rodriguez grew up to become a teacher himself, working with troubled youth in Gary's inner city. He would sometimes tell his students about a boy he once bullied who taught him the most important lesson of his life, that you should never judge someone before you know who they really are, because the person you're picking on might just be extraordinary. November 1968 lasted only a few minutes on that gymnasium stage, but those minutes changed everything. Michael Jackson walked onto that stage as a victim of bullying, and walked off as someone who understood his own power. He learned that being different wasn't a weakness to hide, but a strength to celebrate, and that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply showing the world exactly who you are. The quiet kid who had been mocked for moving weird had proven that weird was actually wonderful, that different was actually devastating, and that the boy they had underestimated was actually legendary. Tommy Rodriguez and everyone else at Gary Elementary learned that day to never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. Because sometimes they're not quiet because they're weak. Sometimes they're quiet because they're saving their voice for something that will leave everyone speechless.